Hello, my name is Gary Mansfield, and this is the Ministry of Arts podcast, where each week I'll be speaking to a different artist. Now let's begin by bagging these bongos.
Yeah, right. Crazy.
Hello, and welcome to episode 259 of the Ministry of Arts podcast. And before I start, as ever, big thanks goes out to our Patreon supporters and those of you that have purchased from our merch store. Without yous, we would not be able to create this podcast. And our previous episode featuring Tom Hunter had so much love on the socials. What an amazing guy and photographer alike. Well, today's guest I come by a chance. I was doing a little bit of research into art and the working classes, and I come by an article about working class artists in Wales, and one of those featured was today's guest, Natalie Chapman. She's a portrait artist whose work really stood out for me, and when I read a little bit about her, I thought I've got to get her on. So I contacted her, and within, I think it was 2 days, it is mentioned in this episode, but I think it was within 2 days I'd sent the invite and the podcast was getting recorded. In this episode, Natalie speaks of growing up in a home where there was parental substance abuse, mental health, physical health, and how that was dealt with from 2 different perspectives, being from within the household and those outside looking in. There was a part of this conversation that really resonated with me. I won't do any spoilers, but Natalie was talking about someone who was acting in a way publicly that was detrimental towards her, which so happened to make her feel excluded. And all it took was someone to take the opposite stance. Just by saying publicly how important it was that Natalie was included, that changed the mindset of that initial person. So if you're able, while you're listening to this episode, go over to Instagram and have a look at Natalie's work, and you'll find many of the paintings that feature in this episode. So please, come along with me as I spoke to Natalie Chapman. How's your day over there? I know it's a very British thing to speak about the weather, but how's your day over there?
Actually, it's a bit sunnier now. It's a bit rough this morning, but
Yeah,
it's
it's
all
same
right now.
Pissing down this morning, brightened up this afternoon.
Oh, God.
I only come by your work just a few days ago, actually.
Yeah.
Loved what I saw.
Oh, thank you. That's
And
nice
then
to
this
hear.
happened like a couple of days later.
I know.
One of the quickest I think I've ever done.
Well, I don't know. Yeah, I have never come across your channel or anything before. And it wasn't until I think I saw your name come up on my notifications that made me look at it, because I've not long done a podcast with a friend of mine who's got a podcast called How Do You Feel Today? So it's about like mental health and stuff. So
Excellent.
obviously the algorithms brought us together.
No, it wasn't. How I discovered you, I recently was speaking to someone from a production company about doing a documentary on the arts in the working classes.
Okay.
So they told me to put a treatment together. Before doing the research, I'd done a bit of post research or loose research, just sort of like making a few notes before doing the research.
Yeah.
And there was you and a group of other people from Wales.
Was it a BBC thing?
I can't remember what it was. Now I looked at so much in that short space, but there was you and 3, 4, half a dozen other fellow Welshmen and women talking about your art and the working class. So
yeah, I did that because there's a gallery that's like about sort of like half an hour, 40 minutes away from where I am, and basically they put my name forward because I think it was BBC Wales were writing an article about this particular problem, like especially are you more affected if you're living in Wales? You probably are. And then so somebody got in touch with me, and then I did I did an interview, a bit like this, like a Zoom thing for
Yeah.
them. And then it was picked up, and I did a radio thing then. So I was actually, funnily enough, I was in Scotland at the time, taking my work to an art fair, and then they phoned me up for my like premiere. I was in premiering, and they were like, would you come and talk on the BBC about blah, blah, blah? And I was like, yeah, how do I get there? Because I'm in Scotland. And they were like, oh, we'll send someone to pick you up. So they sent a taxi and everything. And I was like, bloody hell, this is great.
To where?
to the BBC studios in Edinburgh. And then they dropped me back off at my hotel after.
Brilliant.
It was brilliant, yeah.
Celeb for the day.
For about 5 minutes.
But it feels good though, doesn't it?
Doing
Doing
it
something
felt
new.
great. It felt bloody brilliant, yeah. Yeah, no, it was really good. That is, I suppose, my history really is that I don't know how much was on that article, but I grew up, my parents had drug problems. So my dad was like heavily addicted to heroin, and it was quite a sort of, unsettled life then, growing up like that. And so that kind of led me to being involved with social services and stuff like that when I was a kid. So that kind of, and I was really fortunate actually that there was a social services group that was run by this wonderful man called Chris Robinson, who bought a clapped out old van and used to drive around like rural Wales, picking us all up, waifs and
the child
strays.
snatcher.
Yeah, and he was brilliant, and he made us feel like, he just made us feel like we were worth being picked up, and he took us out on like days out and stuff like that, and we did a lot of art and music and stuff like that. So, and I mean, I was lucky in the sense that my my dad, even though obviously he had his problems with addiction, but he came from quite an artistic family, so there was already that there anyway. But I'm sort of very grateful for my struggles, because I think they've allowed me to have a story to tell.
Well, I've found that on here. I've put out over 250 episodes of this podcast. So, I've spoke to hundreds of artists. The ones that have had obstacles in the way, they tend to make the best story, unless it's just they resonate more with me because I've had my own,
Yeah, I often wonder about that myself. Because for me, when I look at other people's artwork and feel, moved by it or whatever, it's always the ones that are telling a story, and I wonder, is it because of my own story that I'm more drawn to that, or is it just that actually it's that sort of story of struggle and pain and all the rest of it is more honest, I suppose.
Yeah,
it's a very strange thing, that, because you can only go off your own reality, can't you?
Yeah.
And I've definitely found that, like, I recently, it's really difficult for me, so I'm very grateful to have this exposure that you're giving me, because actually it's so difficult for me to even get work shown, and it's a constant sort of battle. Anyway, somebody offered me some space in an exhibition. This is only, I mean, the exhibition is actually up at the minute. And then when they came to my studio, she said, and part of my passion about painting the people that I paint, or the stories that I paint about, is because I believe that everybody deserves a place at the gallery table, and that, like, we're not we shouldn't portraiture in particular has a history, doesn't it, of the elitist get their portraits painted. So I'm a firm believer in, like, I want to paint everybody's story and make sure that people have got a place on the walls when they go in, and if you're not from that background, that you can go in and that there's something there that you were part of. But I this particular gallery owner came into my studio to look at the work, and I'd sent images prior to this event, which she clearly hadn't looked at. And she walked in and did this like horrible, almost like a gasp, at my work, and then was like, "Oh, I can't possibly have anything with a cigarette in or a tattoo. And her reasoning for all this, she said, we have a lot of funding, for mental health, so we can't have these things up on the wall. And I just thought to myself there, like, well, now
It's
that's a
already
massive
barriers,
problem
isn't
in
it?
the chain, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because the funding has clearly gone to somebody that doesn't actually understand the problems surrounding mental
Yeah.
health, because already you're making your environment elitist and you're trying to cut off what I mean. Just because somebody's smoking in my painting doesn't mean that then that person who's come to your Arts for Wellbeing session is going to go and buy a pack of 20 fags. Suddenly start chain smoking. It's like, but in her mind, that's the reality. That is actually what she was thinking. Oh, I'm promoting, I don't know,
Yeah, but that
smoking
sounds
or
like
something.
someone to me, Natalie, that doesn't understand their own guidelines,
Yeah, and it was really interesting because then when I actually went to the opening of this event, there was another artist who had the main space who was giving a talk. And within her talk, bless her, at the end of it, just stopped and said, I just want to say that I'm really glad that Natalie's got some space here because I feel that her work is really important. And the difference post talk,
Oh,
and I was
yeah, I
like,
know, I
it was
know.
clear that then it just didn't, yeah. So it was the kind of two didn't marry. But that was,
And
I think
was
that
her
is,
attitude towards you different after that lady?
yeah, yeah. Then it was on the day, then it was suddenly after there was a definite sort of change in how she was reacting to me, which I think in itself says a lot.
Yeah,
Which, and that's kind of an ongoing thing, really, I think.
yeah,
When I first sort of really experienced it in the art sort of scene, I did my degree, which was really difficult because I was a single parent at that point, and I had I've got 4 kids, but I had 3 young ones at that point, and I'd just come out of quite an abusive relationship, and my dad was not very well. It was like the last sort of year or two of his life. At that point, the addiction had sort of taken over, and he was unable to do much. And I'd had a really successful show, and I'd been listed I think it's in like the Guardian had done a list of like 20 artists who were about to graduate to look out for, and I was like, oh my god, this is amazing, and then I'd been asked to do this exhibition, so I put a piece of work in, and it was a portrait of my dad, big massive portrait, and I really wanted him to come and see it, because I suppose at some form in my mind I had it in the back of my mind that this might potentially be the last
yeah.
one that he gets to see. So yeah, so then I took him along, but at this point he was on like permanent oxygen, so he had like a backpack, and
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
he was finding it difficult to dress himself and stuff. So the only thing we could get him that fitted, that we could afford between me and my siblings, was a giant onesie from
Brilliant,
Primark.
brilliant. Love it.
And so we got it on him. We took him like down into the car to the opening. He wanted to have 10 minutes in the car sorting out his oxygen stuff. So we'd gone in, and everybody was all very, very chatty, and it was all very posh, and everybody's having their wines and all the rest of it. And then he, with his, he's
Like a Teletubby on oxygen.
yeah, yeah, and he was still fagging it, vaping away and all the rest of it. So he came in on his sticks, and and I've never felt the atmosphere
Brilliant.
just change. And it was almost like, everybody went a bit prickly and was like, oh, hang on a minute, we're arting here.
Yeah.
And it was that kind of, sort of weird mixture. They were all impressed with my painting until they were faced with the reality of
Reality
it.
of life, yeah.
And it was like, oh, well, we like it there, but maybe we don't want it,
Yeah, we don't
standing
want to
next to
experience, we
us,
don't want to
or
step into it, yeah.
no. And so I think it has definitely spurred me on to pursue that, really, because I think there's a massive importance to like I'm working on some paintings at the minute that I'm hoping to show in October in a this gallery that's local to me that they've offered me a show, and it's going to be all the stories I couldn't tell. And
Nice.
so I'm going to kind of, hopefully like put some of those out there, because it's, I mean, yeah, we had it's quite mad childhood, really.
Well, let's stop this story for a moment. We'll come back to it.
Yeah,
But I do have several questions that I ask each guest.
yeah, go for
And
it.
the first being, how would you explain what you do to someone that didn't know your work?
Well, I would say that, the majority of my work is autobiographical. So it's my experiences, the people that are in my life or have been in my life, and I try to tell their stories, and but also to sort of tap into something that's slightly more universal than that, and open up conversation for those kind of things. I use a lot of color pattern, a bit like I watched a program years ago. I don't know if you've ever watched. It was a Grayson Perry, Who Are We? And he was
Yeah,
talking
yeah,
where he
yeah,
did the different pieces of art for different people's
yeah.
stories. And in a bit of that, I remember him talking about how he loves that idea of playing with the decorativeness of a pot to lure you in. And I think one of the people on it, he was doing the chap that made his wife take the credit for his speeding offences or something like that. I've forgotten the name of him. Anyway,
Atkins.
I think it was, yeah, that name is ringing a bell. And then
He's a priest now, or a vicar of sorts. Yeah.
oh, that's funny. Because yeah, he'd done this pot all about him, and then but he'd made this tiny little penis stencil, shall we call it? And he'd put it all the way around. And I remember in the unveiling of, it was very beautiful and ornate and all these lovely patterns. And then as you got closer, he was like, "You've put a dick on there." He's like, and I just remember Grayson going, "Yeah, because I think you're a bit of a dick." And I just remember thinking that's kind of, there's an element of that in my work, not that but that thing, that lure of color to me
Yeah,
is like, I'm a bit like a magpie with color and pattern and all of those sort of, so that it's visually appealing when you first get to it, but also that there's a deeper narrative going on, that there's something else being told here. um and I think that's really important as well, to sort of lighten the work as well, because
yeah.
obviously sometimes it's quite heavy, the story might be quite heavy behind it, so you kind of need that playfulness, and things like titles, they're that's part of my work as well. It's quite a
Well, I've
strong
noticed
part.
your. I was about to say your titles are very strong. You help
Yeah,
the viewer understand what the story is. I found that.
yeah. Yeah, because I think sometimes you've got to give people a way into your work. Nobody's a rocket scientist. As much as I think what I've painted makes total sense, if you want people to sort of start thinking about what you're trying to say, you've got to give them something
Yeah,
so that they can sort of have their little way in. So for instance, like I did a show a few years back, and it was titled All the Things I Could Have Been, and I did 15 self-portraits, and they were all sort of moments that had happened in my life, or like choices that I could have made, and it would have
yeah.
got all things like that. But in one of those was when I was really young. I was 21, had a relationship with a much older married man. And I was utterly besotted, I was absolutely, in love with him, and thought that we would be together forever. And
He thought
obviously,
different, obviously.
yeah. And so I was looking back on this, this is a sort of 2-year period in my life where and I was very young, and he's, and I suppose in a way, he filled that father role that,
Yeah, yeah,
at the
yeah.
time my dad was sort of, in his own addiction, so that was a sort of role that was missing. I can reflect on it now and know that at the time obviously it's different, but so I just felt like I had to represent it in my work in some form or another. But this man's business was in flooring, And so I painted a painting saying all I got was heartache and a Persian rug. And it's a
Brilliant.
painting of me at 21
Brilliant.
standing on a Persian rug, drinking a pint of snake bite and black, which you can't buy anymore, but back then
Can you
could.
not?
No, apparently now you can only buy snake bite and black if you mix it yourself. So you have to buy
Oh, I
buy
didn't
the
know
two
that.
separately with a bit of black and then put them together in a pint glass. I
Well, there
know,
you go.
I know. But I think the title then was a sort of opening of discussion. Otherwise, it just would have looked like me,
Yeah.
on a painted floor. So wording is important to me, offering that sort of way in for people or opening up a conversation. I think he gave me a Persian rug,
Brilliant. I knew
which
that.
is why I had that in the title. And I've still got the rug
I
now.
was going to ask you that if you still
Um,
had it.
yeah, it's in my living room. But no, it's that. So when I finished painting all those paintings, because basically it was titled all the things I could have been. So I'd done, I mean, I'd done all of these sort of really important moments in my life. So there was these 13 versions of myself in my studio
Brilliant.
all around me, and it was so emotional. I was like,
Yeah.
holy shit, I wasn't prepared for that. And sometimes when you're faced with your own past, it's quite overwhelming, isn't it? Because
Yeah, you're sitting there, you're looking
you
at
can't,
that foolish girl there and that brave girl there,
yeah,
that innocent girl there and that guilty girl there.
yeah. And you kind of, I think actually it was really cathartic, and it was really like at the end of the day, it sort of let me let go of a lot of guilt that I'd felt for a lot of things that actually, they were just part of my life then, and
Yeah.
I don't have to feel bad about them.
Oh, yeah, all elements that made you what you are today, mate, ain't they?
Yeah, yeah, and nobody can. I was reading this book about, it's called The Four Agreements, but in it it talks about how no other animal will continuously punish themselves
Yeah.
apart from us humans. And it's like, how many times do you want to punish yourself for something that you did, or how many times do you want to punish somebody else for something that they did? At
Well,
the end of the day, once is enough, isn't it? It's like you can't keep revisiting that punishment because it does nobody any good. It's
well, I saw one of your titles, and I will get this wrong. It was quite a long title, but it was something like, well, that was in the 80s and it was different then. That.
Yeah, it was the
Brilliant.
80s then, and I was trying to impress you.
That's it. I do apologise, but yeah, brilliant.
Yeah, because I think I mean, I was born in like 81, so they have visually the 80s has a lot of significance for me in terms of pattern and color and stuff like that. So I suppose, and so those kind of elements came in, and yeah.
Brilliant. You said that your dad was an artist or into art. Was there
Yeah,
much creativity in the home growing up?
massively on my dad's side. So yeah, his father was quite a famous artist, really, and so they lived a very bohemian lifestyle. My grandparents, so they were both artists. They lived in like an artist commune for a while, open house sort
In
of
Wales?
thing. No, in Essex,
Oh, yeah.
and
Was it in Epping?
it was.
Wow.
Yeah,
Okay.
and they moved to so they moved to Great Bardsfield,
Okay.
um, and then they bought a holiday home here in Wales.
The reason that I said, is it in Epping? I was doing some research one time into some arts in Essex, and I
Yeah,
come across this commune, and
yes,
the lady that started it, or was one of the founders, is still there now. And I tried
okay,
to get in touch with them, and there was no email address or Twitter, so I wrote them a letter and never heard back. But there
yeah,
was photographs and tales of this commune and all the artists that had come from it. There you go.
Right. Wow. Well, that's really interesting. Yeah, because I mean, I know that when they were in Great Bardesfield, they bought two houses next door to each other. So one was like they were living in, the other one was a studio, and then there was all the sort of the whole area had been bought up by other artists, and they all used to do these like open exhibitions and different sort of, yeah, it was very sort of lots of parties. And then they bought a house in Wales and moved to Wales then when my dad was about 4, something like that, um, to the village where I am now and where I work. So yeah, it's kind of yeah. So there was, I mean, I was very lucky that I have that sort of good stock.
And are you, a question here, are you
Yeah.
fully accepted within your community as a Welsh person? Because
Mm.
I heard a little thing some time ago that it takes 4 generations to be accepted by a village, and you're 3.
That's really, really interesting because I would say that that is quite an accurate.
There you go.
Growing up, I definitely felt very ostracized from that type of stuff. But then that was partly, it's very difficult when you grow up in quite a rural place. And
Yeah.
obviously, it was quite well known, my dad's drug situation.
So was you that kid at school? Yeah,
Yeah, I was that kid that nobody else was allowed to play with at school.
yeah, yeah. But
So
was you
that's
a
quite,
good kid?
yeah, really good. And I think like what actually people don't realize is a lot of the time when you've got that quite a sort of unsettled background, actually what you're desperate for is that stability. So
Yeah,
for years I was really good, and then I suddenly realized being good is not getting me anywhere, and then things changed, and then I
yeah,
couldn't be, I mean, for instance, I was like when I first went to comprehensive school, I was like set 1 in French, really, really high achiever. And then I really realized quickly that it didn't mean a thing.
yeah.
And my grandmother, bless her, had paid for me to go on a French exchange. So I was really excited. So I'd gone over there and I'd been to and fro with this pen pal. And then she was due to come and stay over with me. I think this was a big turning point actually in terms of me disengaging from school, probably. I went to school one day because this letter had arrived from my pen pal and I couldn't quite make it out. And it was like saying, "Oh, I hope we can see each other one day." And I was thinking, "Well, what do you mean? You're coming to stay next week?" And then I took it to my French teacher in the middle of the class. And she just said in front of everybody, "Oh, there's nobody told you? She won't be coming to stay with you. She's going to stay with," I won't say the lady's name because, but I remember thinking at the time, her, I hated her at school. She was like, the epitome of the Welsh sort of traditional
Yeah,
family
yeah,
who
yeah,
was
yeah.
in top sets of everything and actually was quite mean to me, or I felt was quite mean to
Yeah.
me. And so she told me in front of everybody, "Well, we've decided your family isn't suitable," because I was just living, my parents were split up at that point, and I was just living with my dad. But my dad had been in the paper for ramming the local rehab centre with his Volvo, and it had gone in the
As you
paper, and I
do.
was like, "Oh shit." And so she told me that in front of the whole class, and that I walked out of school that day, and it just changed. I remember leaving and thinking, excuse my language, but fuck this.
Yeah, a little bit of shame. Yeah,
Because I just felt totally humiliated,
yeah,
and like I'd worked really hard, I felt, my whole life to that point, even though I was only like 12. But I felt like I'd really tried desperately to fit in somewhere and to be this normal kid like everybody else, even though I wasn't, because obviously I'd witnessed a lot of stuff, and lots of crazy things had happened to us. So it was sort of like this weird position to be in. But then she sort of humiliated me in front of everybody, and I just left.
I mean, it was, looking back on it, it was probably a bit of safeguarding
Oh,
for
of course, yeah.
but it could have been handled a lot better. I had a similar one in French as well. I was
Yeah.
about 12 or 13. The teacher was going around giving everyone a form to take home because there was a French trip coming up. He's put one on to the kid next to me and then carried on giving them to other people. And I've looked around, everyone is looking at this bit of paper and I haven't even got one. Put my hand up, I went, sir, you didn't give me one of those. He went, you won't be going. And I went, oh, all right. And then I was like, oh, I didn't want to fucking go anyway.
Because it's self-protection at that point,
yeah,
then, isn't
course.
it? You flip into a different mode, and it's like, well, do you know what? I've got to protect myself from that feeling of humiliation again.
And
so
it was
therefore,
without question, because I was a pain in the ass kid.
Yeah.
I was playing up, and you get what you deserve a lot of the time. But again, it was that thing where they could have just gone, because of your actions and how you behave, that's the consequence of it.
Yeah.
And then I would have still gone, well, bollocks, I still don't want to go. I may have still had that same attitude, but it wasn't as sort of,
it's not as and I think as
dismissive.
well, I do a lot of work now in a community centre just down the road, which is where I'm teaching today at 3. But it's like it's for a charity that I set up with some others to give people, young people, free access to arts and music. And recently we'd gone to our local town council to ask for some money for something anyway. And one of the comments made was, well, can't you charge for your kids to come? I was like, well, yeah, but then we're just the same as any other. Like, what you're not getting is that the moment you bring money into that, and to me, within the arts should be free to children in particular, because everybody needs creative expression in some form or another to understand not only their own emotions, but to understand the world, to understand everything. You need to be able to allow your emotions to come out through creativity, because if you don't, they're stored in there. Like, they're not going to come out when you're there doing your accounting for some other company, or all of these sort of jobs that all the system is geared up towards. Let's aim all of our youth into down this road. All of those roads don't have any sort of outlet, and they wonder why mental health is at such a massive problem. And so I was like, well, I'm not going to do that, because if I do that and I start charging for kids to come in, then I'm losing the kids that I want to be there for.
Well,
It's
you're
like
going
a
against your own
no-brainer.
manifesto, aren't you? It's a easy access for all children.
Yeah.
And as soon as you make it even 50 pence,
Yeah.
and
the problem there is as well is you're starting off a class system straight away.
Yeah.
It's like, we've already got that shit going on in schools. Like, it's I don't doubt that my experience at school is this probably any different to kids who are in my situation now. It's probably still happening. Well, in fact, I know it is. I know that there's multiple people who are in that same situation, because let's face it, not a lot has changed in terms of that.
No, unfortunately not.
That's why I think it's even more so that I'm so keen to make my art a success, so that it can be seen, and so that I can have these conversations with people who are willing to listen.
Yeah, good. It changed me entirely from, whatever I am now is neither here nor there. But what I was before art came into my life, I was a professional criminal. I was violent. When I discovered art and I wanted to become an artist, I knew that thing that was sitting in that prison cell couldn't come on that journey with me.
No.
Otherwise, he wouldn't get very far. I was well aware of that. So I spent the next couple of years trying to be this new person. I mean, this is the result of that 20 odd years later. But, if it's a perfect representation of a working class artist is for someone else to say. But I know that it's a world away from the one that initially discovered art, that's for sure.
And there's an element of that sort of like fake it till you make it thing. Like, if you start doing the things, even if they don't feel 100% comfortable in the beginning, because like you said, you're still fighting with I see it in, a lot of people. I've worked with lots of different groups, and even if it's not necessarily doesn't feel natural straight away, because change is difficult when you've got years of certain habits or whatever, you know, the way of being, change is difficult. But what art can do is offer you those little helpers along the way, and then if you continue to do those, then they start to become part of you, and then the
Yeah.
more you do that, the more of that becomes part of you,
Yeah,
and then
'cause
eventually you become that
yeah,
instead of
I
what
didn't,
you
and the
previously were.
opposite to that, Natalie, I didn't become that violent person overnight either. You know,
No,
that was a process from being a cute 3-year-old up to what I was at 15, you know, and then again at 25.
yeah, and I think, you know, 9 times out of 10, there's so much more. I mean, I have a cousin, my first cousin, who has just come out of prison after 4 years for um, drug offences, but that was again him just he came out of care. There was no support system for him as a care leaver. So he's ended up with addiction problems himself, and then ended up falling into a system where he had to be the runner to be able to support his own
Yeah,
habit. And
yeah,
then
yeah, yeah.
obviously when all that's and now he's in a halfway house, and hopefully he will. But I don't know what his experience was yet, because I haven't seen him yet. But it's that thing of, I've got my best friend, one of my best friends from when I was a kid. We grew up in the same village, and we sort of, I suppose, connected because I had this difficulty going on at home, and he had a sort of different type of difficulty. His father was very violent to him and his mother and his siblings. And so we bonded over that. But he has spent his whole life in and out of prison. And I feel so sad about that. He had one moment where he learned how to play the guitar on one of his stints, and when he came out, you know, we'd sit around and he'd play songs, and I was just like, this could be it. And sadly, it maybe hasn't been. I mean, he's not in prison now, but you know, I just think that as a kid, he never had the support to help him with that outlet of his pain and his trauma. And I think if he had have, then he's a beautiful, kind, caring soul, and he's really intellectual and all the rest of it, but
Who's really
hasn't
good at
had,
making wrong decisions as
yeah,
well, you know.
and hasn't had that
Yeah.
sort of level of support to find that creative side in himself. So that's the thing as well, isn't it? It needs support
But
on.
like we were saying, that's about characters. Them sort of things that builds up a massive story for you to be able to show people in your art.
Yeah, and I mean, now I wouldn't change it for the world, because otherwise, God, what would I be painting? I don't know.
Well, that's the people that influence you. And about artists, there's a question I ask each guest, which is, if there was you and 5 other artists, past or present, what would your ideal group show be?
Oh, okay. Me, Frida Kahlo, Tracy Emin, Paula Rego. Oh, I've only got one left. I'd probably say maybe I'll choose somebody really current. Sarah Lucas.
That's a that's a good bunch, isn't it?
It's a good
Getting
bunch,
Sarah
isn't it?
Lucas and Tracy Emin back together,
Yeah, and
that'd
I
be
suppose
something,
they're
wouldn't it?
all the people that have influenced me massively, because they're all sort of women telling their personal stories, I suppose, in a way. So that's kind of, you know, they're always my favorite when I look at artists, really.
And is it because of their personal journey that influences you?
I think so. It's that, but it's the honesty in the work as well. The idea, I mean, I'd be tempted to put Maggie Hamblin in there just for the fags. And
She's
just,
been on here.
oh, is she? God, she's just brilliant. Oh, I'll have to listen to that. Just for that sheer ballsiness of it, and like that unashamed, you know. I think as well, you know, as women, a lot of the time you're sort of shamed into not telling your story, and I think those women in particular have just done a two fingers up at everyone, and I'm telling it whether you like it or not, you know.
Exactly. Well, that lady you mentioned earlier on, who mentioned about the cigarettes, should have had Maggie Amblin turn up there,
She
and
should have. I bet she wouldn't have told Maggie Hamlin
yeah,
that.
that would have frightened the fucking life out of her, wouldn't it? Looking at your paintings, without knowing any of the context, just seeing the painting straight away, by the time I'd looked at half a dozen of your portraits, to me, I saw Hockney and Matisse.
Yeah. Yeah, I suppose, I mean, Matisse, obviously, the colour, that sort of flat colour and the pattern and those sort of elements. And yeah, Hockney's been massive, you know, in terms of reference. And also that, so what I like about Hockney is you can't really put him in any type of box because he's
No.
forever sort of experimenting, which I do love. You know, I've done a bit of film myself and a bit of I'm doing another film at the moment just because I kind of like that medium of it's a kind of good way to get your story across.
When I look at an artwork, I try to think who two of the influences could be, as if they were like mum and dad who made you, you know. And
Yeah.
when I saw your work, I thought of Matisse and Stella Vine, that your
Yeah.
work is like the love child of the both, you know.
Yeah.
But as
Yeah.
a viewer with no context,
That's quite a good game. I feel like I might try and do that with other artists.
but yeah, that's how I
Yeah.
saw your work. And as I say, although I knew you was a working class artist, because that's how I discovered you,
Yeah.
whenever I feel someone has had a challenge to get to where they are, they've always got a soft spot in my heart. So you was already there anyway, but
Oh.
I loved your artwork when I saw it, you know.
Oh, thank you.
It
Yeah, no,
had that
you know,
raw grittiness.
I'm the same. I think if somebody's made that effort, then it's yeah, I think it's kind of you've got to then
Well,
um
a little story that again I've said on here a million times that I know will resonate with you. When I discovered art, I thought I wanted to be an artist, but artists aren't people off of, you know, a working class housing
no,
estate like mine. I thought that that was something I couldn't be. My friends would
yeah,
say, you know, you could be a tattooist or a sign writer. And as much as there's nothing wrong with those professions, I didn't want to be that. I wanted to be an
no,
artist.
yeah,
And I was gutted to think that this wouldn't be for me. And then
yeah,
the tutor in prison brought in a program called Oil on Canvas, and they was looking at all the different elements of painting, and they started showing this artwork, and it was gritty, it was gnarly, dark. It looked like an East End villain film, you know, an East End
yeah,
gangster film. Like you saw the brush picking up paint and going onto the canvas, you know, you saw this brush painting. Then the guy went along the lines of, "Hello, my name's Ray Richardson. I'm from Woolwich, South East London." And then I was like, "Fuck, he sounds like me. I can.
yeah,
He is, so I can." That was my fucking moment when I
yeah,
knew all I had to do now was the hard work. He made me realise that it was accessible for
accessible.
no
Yeah,
matter what his journey was
you
to
had
get
a
there.
way in, isn't it? You can see that there's a
It's
way in.
possible, yeah. And I should add, I wrote to him from prison, and Patrick, the one I mentioned before.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're both still friends to this day, 30 years later.
I think it's when I did a pop-up in there was an empty building in the village, like a sort of town next town along, and I did a pop-up show there, and a lady popped her head in, and that's where I usually have a little space in the gallery in that town. And she said, I was setting up in this little pop-up shop, and she said, "Oh God, it's your work. I go up to look at your work in the window at the gallery up there." And I was like, "Oh yeah, come in, you know." And she'd just gone to get some milk or something, and she was saying to me like, "Oh God, I love your work. I just like to go and look at it because it reminds me of me." And
Brilliant.
and I was like, "Oh, I was so moved by it." And then she said, and at the time I was making t-shirts, like printing t-shirts for this pop-up thing. And then she said, "Oh, you've got t-shirts here." I was like, "Yeah, I've got t-shirts." She's like, "Oh, I get my cost of living payment at the end of the week. I might be able to afford a t-shirt."
Oh, man.
And I just thought to myself, fucking hell, you can have a t-shirt, love. Jesus. But it was
Just
just that
stop
thing
it
of like,
before I cry.
yeah, but it was just that amazing thing of like, actually, why shouldn't she have a bloody t-shirt? Like,
Yeah.
why? Like, I don't want to be this sort of it's a weird thing, isn't it? I want nothing more than to be a well-known, famous artist. But then on the other end of it, I want nothing more than for everybody to be able to have a piece of my work if they
Yeah,
want it.
yeah.
So it's like this weird sort of position where you're mentally always striving to be in with the elitists, but desperately not wanting to be one either.
Yeah, but you can also be an elite painter and make T-shirts as well.
This is true. This is what I found. So I've got a badge maker now.
There you go. There you go.
So I make little hand-painted badges, which is brilliant because everybody can have one.
Well, if you wasn't an artist, what do you reckon you'd like to be?
I a music. Well, I mean, I love music as well, so I write and play. So maybe a musician.
What is it you play?
I play guitar and I write. I've got a girl band called Hag.
Excellent name. And what have you got coming up, Natalie? Have you got anything in the pipeline?
Yeah, so I'm gonna have some work in a gallery called Studio Kennin, which is local to where I am, and I've got a solo show coming up in Canvas Gallery in Cardigan, which they have been my like ultimate support from the off. Like sometimes you just need somebody to believe in you, and they have been brilliant. Like they've given me space. They took me to the Affordable Art Fair. They put me in touch with the BBC, which inadvertently has put me in touch with you. So, they've been really supportive. They let me show, I did a photography show of like the last sort of couple of years of my dad's life, because I used to have to take his meds over to him and stuff. And I was photographing him at the time. And, it's not your commercial show that,
Yeah.
sort of like Richard Billingham, Nan Golding inspired work.
Listen, I'm just writing down to tell you, I don't suppose you can see it there. I was writing Richard Billingham to say to you to have a look at his work.
Yeah.
There you go.
So
excellent. Sorry about that.
Yeah, he's one of my favorite. Like that body of work, Raise the Laugh, is just
brilliant.
Amazing.
It's as brilliant as it's tragic, as it's funny, as it's sad.
Yeah. And actually that's kind of what I strive to be. Brilliantly, tragically funny.
That's the end. That's your next solo show title, isn't it? Brilliantly, tragically funny.
I know.
And where can anyone see your brilliant, tragic yet funny work? Be it online, website, or social media?
I mean, it's probably my Instagram is Natalie Chapman Artist, and then I've got a website as well, which is the same name, Natalie Chapman Artist. So yeah, those are the places.
And is that .com or .co.uk?
It's .co.uk.
Right. Because that isn't on your Instagram profile, is it?
No, it was.
You've got New Blood on there.
I've got New Blood on there, yeah, because I sell with them as well. But I haven't actually. I need to relink my website because I was just changing up some stuff on it. So I will do that today.
Natalie, that's my questions asked, and I'm so pleased that I found you last week.
Oh, I'm totally chuffed. Yeah, we'll have to stay in touch because
most definitely.
I think it's really interesting what you're doing and where you've come and all that sort of stuff. I always love meeting people with a different colourful background. I'm going to go and teach now with a happy face.
Yeah, good on you. All right, Natalie, all the best, and I'll speak to you
soon. All right, take care.
See you later, darling.
Bye.
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 Well, I hope you enjoyed that episode of the Ministry of Arts podcast. It's a podcast that's produced with the help of the listener. And if you like what you've heard and you think you might be able to give a little support, there's two ways in which you can do it. If you go over to the Ministry of Arts Instagram profile, you'll find a Linktree drop-down box. And in that box, you'll find two links. One is called Buy Us a Coffee, and it's pretty much that. You can make a one-off payment, the price of a cup of coffee. Or, if you're able and want to do it more long-term, you can become a Ministry of Arts Patreon, where you can sign up to support us on a monthly basis. And 100% of your support goes back into the podcast. And if you're not able to do that, that's absolutely fine. This content is free for everyone. But we would urge you to follow us on your socials and show us a bit of love that way. Either way, Thanks for listening, and see you next time. Ta-da.